The Grand Master of Demonic Cultivation, written by Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. An unofficial reading by Emm Wilde. Book 1. Chapter 3. The Prideful. It didn't take long before Wei Wuxian discovered that he might have made a mistake. This spotted donkey that he'd stolen away with was way too hard to please. It was a mere donkey, but all it would eat was fresh, tender grass that dripped with dew, and it would refuse to eat if the tip of the grass was yellowed even a little bit. When they passed by a farmhouse, Wei Wuxian stole a bit of straw to feed it. After only chewing a couple of bites, it spat it out in disgust, and the sound of it was louder and clearer than when a human spat. If it didn't eat well, then it would refuse to walk, throw tantrums, and kick its legs. Wei Wuxian himself was nearly walloped several times. On top of that, its braying cry was remarkably horrible. As a steed or as a beloved pet, it was utterly useless. Wei Wuxian couldn't help but miss his sword, which was most likely now hanging in some major clan leader's wall as a trophy. Pulling and dragging the donkey for all he was worth, he traveled down a rambling road. He finally came to pass the large paddy field of a village. The sun was scorching. Next to the field ridge was a large locust tree, and the area beneath the tree was thick with green shade. There was also an old well, and the villagers had placed a bucket and scoop next to it to provide relief to the thirst of passers-by. When the spotted donkey reached this place, it refused to walk a step further. Wei Wuxian hopped down and patted its esteemed derriere. "Well, aren't you a pampered and noble little steed? And even harder to please than I am." The donkey snorted at him. As they mucked around, a group approached from the crisscrossing paths in the distance. Those people carried hand-woven bamboo baskets and wore cloth shirts and straw hats. They exuded the rustic air of the country from head to toe. There was a round-faced young girl among them, somewhat delicately pretty, but hardly notably so. Perhaps they had also trekked for too long under the scorching sun, as they also wanted to come over for a drink of water and stand under the shade. However, when they saw a kicking and screaming spotted donkey tied to the tree, accompanied by a disheveled, loose-haired lunatic smeared with rouge and white powder, they didn't dare come over. Wei Wuxian had always considered himself a man who cherished beauty, so when he noticed their hesitation, he moved from his spot to give them space and went to bother the spotted donkey. When that group saw that he was harmless, they relaxed and walked over. Each of them was drenched in sweat and red in the face, fanning themselves and drawing water as they needed. The girl sat by the wall, and, seeming to know that Wei Wuxian had purposefully yielded space, she smiled softly at him. One of the men was holding a compass in his hand, and he gazed far into the distance before looking back down, confused. "How come the needle still won't move, even though we're almost at the foot of Mount Dafan?" The carvings on that compass and its needle were both quite particular. It was no ordinary compass. A compass of ill winds wasn't used to pathfind, but rather to point out the whereabouts of nearby nefarious creatures. Wei Wuxian knew that this meant that he had come across one of the small, downtrodden clans of the countryside. Outside of the elite, affluent clans, there were also quite a number of these small, independent clans. Wei Wuxian thought perhaps that they had traveled here from the countryside to seek refuge with a large clan with which they had become familiar relations, or perhaps they were out here to go on a night hunt. The middle-aged man who had been the group's leader told the other man to go for a drink and commented, "Is that compass of yours broken? I'll give you a new one later. Mount Dafan is less than 5 kilometers away. So we can't rest for too long. We've traveled all this way. It won't be worth it if we slack now and fall behind the others." It was a night hunt, as expected. Many cultivation clans, in their appreciation for refined elegance, called the act of traveling the world to exercise evil hunting expeditions, and because said evils often appeared at night, such activities were thus called night hunts. There were numerous cultivation clans that had come and gone, and only a handful that had been able to make a name for themselves. If an ordinary clan, one without generations of accumulated reputation to stand on, wanted to join the higher ranks and become famous, wanted to gain prestige and respect among the cultivation world, then they had to show tangible achievements. Only when they hunted down ruthless monsters or disaster-bringing malicious fiends did their words gain any weight. These night hunts had originally been Wei Wuxian's expertise, but he had been constantly on the move for the past few days and had only managed to hunt down a handful of little devils from a few graves that he had broken into. He was in need of a band of tyrannical ghost generals to do his bidding, so he, too, decided to head to the Rice Mountain and try his luck. If there was one that would prove useful, he would capture it for his own. That group had finished their break and were ready to be on their way as well. Before they left, the round-faced girl took out a half-green, barely red apple from a basket on her back and handed it to Wei Wuxian. "For you." Wei Wuxian extended his hand to receive it with a happy grin, but the spotted donkey raised its head and bared its teeth to bite for it, so Wei Wuxian quickly snatched it up instead. Seeing how the donkey drooled for the little apple, an idea came to him. Upon finding a long branch and some fishing thread, he dangled the apple in front of the donkey. The spotted donkey smelled the sweet fragrance of the apple and craved it. With its head raised, it chased after the apple that dangled just barely out of reach. It ended up becoming faster than all the renowned steeds Wei Wuxian had ever seen, leaving them all in the dust. The donkey ran without stopping, and Wei Wuxian arrived at Mount Dafan before dark. It was only when he reached the foot of the mountain that he learned that the fan in Dafan did not mean rice, but instead Brahma. Seen from a distance, the shape of the mountain resembled that of a short, carefree, and content Buddha, hence its name. There was a small town at the foot of the mountain, and so it was called Fojiu Town, meaning Buddha's foot. There were more cultivators gathered here than he had imagined. It was an assembly of all sorts, a confusion of colors caused by the different uniforms of various clans and sects walking up and down the streets. For some reason, everyone appeared tense. Even at the sight of his wacky looks, no one seemed like they could spare a moment to mock him. At the center of the long street, there was a bunch of cultivators gathering in a serious discussion. It sounded like they were having quite a difference of opinions. Wei Wuxian could hear them far down the street. It was all right at first, but it somehow grew more and more heated. "I don't believe there are soul-eating beasts or fiends at all. There was clearly no activity on any azimuth of the compass of ill winds. If there aren't, then how did 7 townsfolk lose their souls? They couldn't possibly have all contracted the same disease. I've never heard of such an illness before. Just because the compass of ill winds doesn't show something doesn't mean it's not there. The most it can do is point in the general direction anyways. It's not accurate enough to be fully trusted. Maybe there's something nearby that's obstructing the needle? Why don't you think about who invented the compass of ill winds? I've never heard of anything that could interact with the needle." "What are you trying to say, huh? What are you implying? Of course I know that the compass of ill winds was created by Wei Ying, but it's not like his creations were perfect, so why are you stopping people from questioning it?" "I didn't say you can't, and I didn't say his creations were perfect either. No need to slander." And so their argument swerved in a different direction. Wei Wuxian giggled and laughed as he rode past on his donkey. He wouldn't have thought that, after so many years, he still stood strong and unfailing as a topic of cultivators' verbal battles. He had a way of starting conflict, you might say. If there was ever a vote on who had the most enduring popularity amongst all the clans, then he was the sure winner. In all fairness, that cultivator wasn't wrong. The compass of ill winds that was in common use now was only the early version, so it was indeed not accurate enough. He had started on refining it, but it wasn't his fault that his good old lair had been toppled before it was done, so everyone would just have to deal with it and continue using the fallible first edition. Anyways, creatures that consumed flesh were most likely low level, walking corpses, for example. Only refined, high-level monsters or spirits could consume and digest souls. 7 souls had been eaten in one go, too, so it was no wonder that many clans had assembled here. Since this night hunt's prey was hardly insignificant in strength, it couldn't be helped that the compass of ill winds would run into issues. Wei Wuxian pulled on the reins and hopped off the donkey, then grabbed the apple that had been dangling in front of it this entire time and tugged it down into its mouth. 1 bite, only 1 bite. Bah, aren't you trying to eat my entire hand in 1 bite? He took a couple bites of the apple on the other side, and then stuffed it back into the spotted donkey's mouth. As he was reflecting on how he'd fallen so low as to share a single apple with a donkey, someone suddenly bumped into his back. He turned his head and saw that it was a girl. While she was the one who bumped into him, she took no notice of him at all. Her eyes were unfocused and glazed, fixated in a certain direction with a smile on her face. Wei Wuxian followed the azimuth of her gaze. In the direction was the dense mountaintop. It was Mount Dafan. All of a sudden, without warning, the girl started dancing in front of him. This dance was feral and threatening, her arms flailing. Wei Wuxian was taking great pleasure in watching this show, but just then a woman came dashing over with her skirt lifted. She wailed as she hugged the girl. "Ayan, let's go back! Let's go!" Ayan fought her off. The smile still on her face, never having faded, carried a hair-raising sense of material affection, and she danced and pranced while that woman continued to chase after her around the streets, weeping as she went. A street vendor on the side commented, "What a sin! Ah Young from the blacksmith Jiang's house escaped again. It's truly sad for her mom, Ayan's husband, and her own husband as well. It's not right at all." Wei Wuxian sauntered over, and from snatches of overheard conversation on the street, sorted out the strange affair that had happened there. There was an old graveyard on Mount Dafan, and most of the ancestral graves of Fogio Town's people were located there. Sometimes they also dug graves and placed wooden markers for unnamed corpses. Many months ago, there had been a stormy night when lightning crashed and thunder boomed. And after a night of being battered by torrential rain, a piece of land from the mountain slid and collapsed. This piece of land, more specifically, was the graveyard. Many of the old graves had been destroyed, and several coffins were expelled from the earth. Then lightning struck, sending the coffin lids flying and charring black both the corpses and their coffins. The people of Fogio Town felt very uneasy at all of this. They prayed for good fortune and rebuilt the old graveyard in hopes that that would settle things. Despite their efforts, since then, cases of people losing their souls began to frequently crop up in Fogio Town. The first one was a deadbeat. A man was penniless and good for nothing, spending his days in idleness. But since he always loved catching birds up on the mountain, it just so happened that he was trapped on Mount Dafan the night of the landslide. He was scared half to death, but at least he was still alive. The curious thing was that it didn't take long after his return for him to suddenly get married. The wedding was conducted with great fanfare, and he declared his intent to do good from that day onward, and accumulate good fortune, and to live the rest of his life in peace. On his wedding night, he got blackout drunk and never got up from laying down in bed. The wife called him, but he wouldn't respond. It was only after pushing him that she discovered that the groom had an empty stare and his body was cold. Aside from his breathing, he was no different than the dead. He lay like this, neither eating nor drinking, for many days, then was finally buried in peace. Pitiful was the bride who had only just been married and been turned into a widow. The second one was Ayan of blacksmith Xiang's family. The girl had gotten engaged when, at the very next day, her future husband was killed by a jackal while hunting on the mountain. After learning this, she was struck by the same affliction as had descended upon that deadbeat. Fortunately, she recovered from the soulless disease on her own after some time. However, it had also caused her to become deranged, giggling as she danced outside the front of others. The third one was Ayan's father, blacksmith Xiang. To date, there had now been 7 people who had fallen victim consecutively. Wei Wuxian mulled this over. It was most likely a soul-eating fiend, not a soul-eating beast. Even though the difference was just one word, they were completely distinct creatures. Fiends belonged to the ghost category, while beasts were of the monster category. In his opinion, all of this might be the fault of the old graveyard that had collapsed from the tremors and the landslide. Once lightning struck open the coffins, any ancient fiends that had been resting within would have been unleashed. He'd be able to determine if this was really the case once he took a look at what the coffins were made of, and if there were any remnants of any sealed talismans. However, the people of Fojiao Town would surely have reburied the charred coffins a long time ago, and also reburied the corpses anew, so there was definitely not much evidence left. He would have to take the trail that started from Fojiao Town in order to properly scale the mountain, so Wei Wuxian leisurely treaded up the hill with his donkey. After a while, he ran into a few people descending the mountain with gloomy expressions. Some of them carried injuries on their faces, and they were talking all at once. They all jumped in surprise when they ran into this donkey rider with a face caked in hanged ghost makeup under the darkened sky, and they cursed as they went around him and hurried down the hill. Wei Wuxian turned his head and wondered, could it be that the prey was too difficult to handle, and they were going back empty-handed? He slapped the donkey's hip after a moment's thought and trotted up the mountain. That group groused and complained after his departure. I've never met anyone so unreasonable. Why would the clan leader of such a big clan come here just to fight us over a soul-eating fiend? He already killed plenty of those when he was younger, I'm sure. What can you do? He's a sect leader. Of all the sects to offend, you don't offend the Jiang clan, and of all the people to offend, you never offend Jiang Cheng. Let's just write it off as our bad luck, pack up, and get out of here. A torch would be necessary to continue into the mountain forest if the sky got any darker. Wei Wuxian walked for a while and was quite surprised to not run into many cultivators. Of all the clans that came, could it really be that half are arguing theory in Fojiao Town, while the other half are like that group from earlier, trying, failing, and going back empty-handed? Suddenly, a cry for help came from ahead. Somebody, help! There were both male and female voices, their cries full of panic and helplessness. It didn't sound fake, even though 9 times out of 10, cries for help in the wild were evil spirits out causing mischief, luring the ignorant into a trap. Wei Wuxian, however, was thrilled. The eviler, the better. It had better be evil enough. He urged the donkey to run towards where the voices were coming from, but when he arrived, there was nothing in sight. When he looked up, rather than any evil spirits or monsters, he saw the independent countryside clan that he had run into previously by the field ridge. They were hanging from a tree, caught in a massive, shimmering gold net. That middle-aged man had led the group to patrol and scout the forest area at first, but they hadn't run into any prey they were hoping for. Instead, they had stepped into a net trap some rich folk had set up and ended up hanging from a tree as they cried their grievances. They perked up when they saw someone had come, but were immediately greatly disappointed to realize that it was the lunatic. While the threads of this immortal binding net were thin, the material was of highest grade, durable and indestructible. Once caught, it didn't matter if you were a human or a god, a ghost or a spirit, you'd be trapped a good while. Unless, that is, if it's cut with an immortal device of a higher grade. It'd be pointless to expect this lunatic to help them down. He probably didn't even know what the net was. Just as they were going to ask him to try and help, there came a sound of agile steps crinkling leaves, approaching swiftly. From within the pitch-black woods, there emerged a youth dressed in a light-colored jacket. There was a vermilion mark dotted between the brows of this little young master, and his features were so fine that they were almost harsh. He was extremely young, around the same age as Lan Suzhui, a mere adolescent. On his back he carried a quiver of arrows and a longsword shimmering with gold, and in his hand there was a longbow. The embroidery on his robes was indisputably exquisite, swirling together into an extraordinary white peony. The gold threads twinkled delicately in the night. Wei Wuxian marveled internally. Rich people. This was a young master belonging to the Jin clan of Lanling. Only this clan used the white peony as their insignia. By comparing themselves to the king of flowers, they implied that they were kings among immortals. Dotting one's forehead with cinnabar symbolized the conviction to open the door to wisdom, allowing the vermilion light of eternity to shine upon the world. This little young master had been about to shoot, but when he saw the immortal binding net had only captured humans, disappointment flashed on his face, and he lost his patience. It's you stupid idiots every time. Over 400 immortal binding nets, but it's always the same. Before they manage to catch their prey, dozens of them get wrecked by you lot. The same thought was still in the forefront of Wei Wuxian's mind. Rich people. An immortal binding net was already considered expensive, and he'd already set over 400 of them in one go. As expected of the Jin clan of Lanling, an even slightly smaller clan would have been reduced to poverty and ruin. However, to abuse the immortal binding net like this, to hunt indiscriminately, was not a night hunt. This was clearly an act of driving others out in order to hoard the spoils. It appeared that the cultivators who retreated previously hadn't done so because the prey was difficult, but because these prestigious sects weren't ones to be offended. During the days he'd spent strolling along, and on account of his ravenous eavesdropping earlier in Fuzhou town, Wei Wuxian had heard plenty of gossip about the rises and falls within the cultivation world. As the final victor of the tangled war between the cultivation clans that had spanned over 100 years, the Jin clan of Lanling now led the sects and clans. The head of their clan was even respectfully addressed as cultivation chief. The Jin clan had always been haughty and enjoyed extravagance. In the span of years presiding high over the others, the clan had prospered and grown powerful, and their disciples were raised to dominate others without scruple. Inferior clans, no matter how much they were humiliated, had no choice but to swallow it down. Such a small cultivation house from the countryside could afford even less to offend them. This is why, although the boy's words were harsh and the people hanging in the net turned red in the face at the abuse, they still didn't dare argue back. The middle-aged man said subserviently, "Will the young master grant us the favor of lowering us down?" The youth was frustrated that his prey had still not shown itself, so this country bumpkin was the perfect secondary target for venting his anger. He crossed his arms. "Stay hanging there so you don't wander around and hinder me again. Once I catch the soul-eating beast, I'll let you guys go, if I remember." If they really hung from the tree that entire night, unable to move, there would be nothing they could do but have their souls sucked out if the thing wandering Danfan Mountain came upon them. The round-faced girl who had given Wei Wuxian an apple was terrified and wept out loud. Wei Wuxian was sitting cross-legged on the back of the spotted donkey, but when the donkey heard her crying, its long ears twitched. Suddenly, it leapt forth. It even let out a long braying when it did, and if not for that uniquely horrible sound, it would have appeared irresistibly heroic. It wouldn't be idle flattery to call it a mighty young colt. Caught off guard, Wei Wuxian was thrown from its back and nearly broke his skull from the fall. The spotted donkey's broad head charged towards the youth, apparently convinced that it could send the boy flying with a headbutt. The youth's arrow was still knocked in his bow, and he was ready to shoot it down. Wei Wuxian didn't want to go find a new ride so soon, so he pulled at the reins with all his might. That youth took a glance at him and briefly appeared stunned before his expression immediately turned into scorn. He pursed his lips. "Oh, it's you." That tone was 2 parts surprise and 8 parts revulsion, making Wei Wuxian blink in confusion. "What, you went crazy after getting kicked out of your old home? Look at that ghastly painted face. I can't believe they let you out." What was this incredible thing he had just heard? Could it be? Wei Wuxian slapped his own thigh. Could it be that Mo Xiang's father was not some random small-time clan leader, but the infamous Jin Jiangquan? Jin Jiangquan had been the previous head of the Jin clan of Lanling and had long since passed on. This was a character with a long story. He had a fiercely strict madam wife from an illustrious family and been notoriously afraid of her. But scared as he might have been, he still incessantly played around with other women. No matter how strict Madame Jin was, she couldn't follow him around 24 hours a day. He was relentless in his affairs, betting women from distinguished ladies above to wild prostitutes below. And while he loved womanizing and had a great number of illegitimate children, he was extremely fickle in love. Once he grew tired of a woman, she'd be cast from his mind without any thought of responsibility. Of his many illegitimate children, only one had been outstanding enough to be recognized and taken back, and that was the current family head of the Jin clan of Lanling, Jin Guangyao. Furthermore, even the way that Jin Guanshen died was an embarrassment. Old, but fully confident that he was still robust, he'd fooled around with a bunch of women at once in order to challenge himself. However, he unfortunately overestimated his vitality and died during the orgy. This was simply too embarrassing to speak of, so the Jin clan of Lanling unanimously declared that the old sect leader had passed due to overexertion, and the rest of the clans, in tacit understanding, all pretended not to know the full truth of the statement. In any case, that was the real reason for his infamy. Back during the siege of the burial mounds, Jin Guanshen's contributions to the effort had been second only to Jiang Cheng's. Now that Wei Wuxian had overtaken his illegitimate son's body, he really didn't know how this score should be settled. The youth saw him zone out and grew annoyed. "Get out of here! Just seeing your face disgusts me, damn cutsleeve." In terms of seniority, Mo Xiang might have been this boy's uncle or some other elder, and yet he had to suffer such humiliation from the junior. Even if it wasn't for himself, as he was currently in Mo Xiang's body, Wei Wuxian felt the responsibility to humiliate the boy back. So he countered, "Didn't your mother teach you any manners?" Raging flames of fury flashed in the youth's eyes. He pulled the longsword from his back and glowered. What did you say?" The sword shimmered gold. It was clearly a rare, high-quality weapon that would have been out of many clans' reach even if they hustled their entire lives. Wei Wuxian studied it, fixated, and felt the sword appeared rather familiar. But he'd seen plenty of high-quality swords that glowed golden, so he didn't think too deeply on it. He only twirled a small pouch in his hand. This was a spirit-trapping pouch that he'd thrown together haphazardly a few days ago, using scraps of fabric that he had found. The youth lunged at him, brandishing his sword, and Wei Wuxian took a small piece of paper cut in the shape of a human from the pouch. He dodged the attack, then slapped the paper onto the other's back. The youth was already swift, but Wei Wuxian had plenty of experience in trapping people and slapping talisman onto them, so he was faster. The youth felt his back go numb and heavy, then fell forward onto the ground involuntarily. The sword dropped to his side with a clang. He couldn't get up, no matter how hard he tried. It was as if Mount Tai was sitting on top of him. More specifically, it was a ghost that had died of gluttony that clung to his back, crushing the breath out of him. While the little ghost was weak, it could easily take care of a brat like this. Wei Wuxian picked up the sword, weighing it in his hand, and then swung it at the immortal binding net, snapping it. The cultivation family dropped to the ground in sorry confusion, and then ran away in a hurry without a word. The round-faced girl seemed to want to express thanks, but her elder dragged her away, afraid that the young Master Jin would hold on to any deeper grudge should she say one more word. The youth on the ground yelled angrily, "Damn Cutsleeve! Look at you, going down the demonic path just because your spiritual powers are too weak to cultivate into anything worthwhile. You watch yourself. Do you know who's here today? I'm gonna—" Wei Wuxian clutched his heart insincerely. I'm so scared." The cultivation method he'd employed in the past was denounced by the public. It harmed the cultivator's constitution after prolonged practice, but it allowed for speedy success and was unrestricted by one's innate spiritual prowess and natural talent, which was why it was an extremely tempting path. There was never a shortage of people who craved shortcuts in their training. And so this youth also thought that Mo Xiang had strayed from the right path after being driven out of the Jin clan of Lanling. It was a perfectly logical suspicion, and it saved Wei Wuxian from further unnecessary trouble. The youth tried to push off the ground, but still couldn't get up after several attempts. His face was flushed, and he clenched his teeth. "If you don't remove this thing, I'll tell my uncle, and you'll be dead." Wei Wuxian asked curiously, "Why is it your uncle and not your dad? Who's your uncle?" There was a sudden voice behind him, grave and intensely frigid. "I'm his uncle. Do you have any last words?" At the sound of that voice, every drop of blood in Wei Wuxian's body seemed to surge to his head, but then immediately drain away again. Thankfully, his face was already a mess of ghastly white, so it didn't look strange when he went a little paler. A man in purple attire strode over. He was dressed in a narrow-sleeved light robe, with his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. A silver bell dangled from his waist, yet there was no sound when he walked. This man had fine brows and almond eyes, with a chiseled handsomeness to his features. His eyes were deep and intense with a hint of aggression, his gaze like two streaks of cold lightning. He stopped and stood 3 meters away from Wei Wuxian. His expression was like that of a nocked arrow on a bow, ready to shoot, and even his composure was suffused with arrogant pride. He furrowed his brows. "Jinling, why have you dawdled for so long? Do I need to come and invite you back? Look at the terrible state you're in. Get the hell up." After the initial numbness in his brain passed away, Wei Wuxian quickly snapped out of it. He beckoned with his fingers inside his sleeves, withdrawing the paper doll. Jinling felt the weight disappear off his back and immediately scrambled up, grabbing his sword back and scurrying to Jiangxiang's side. He pointed at Wei Wuxian and yelled, "I'll break your legs!" When the two stood together, there was a vague resemblance in their looks, much like a pair of brothers. Jiangxiang raised his finger, and the paper doll swiftly slipped from Wei Wuxian's fingers and flew into his hand. He took a glance at it, and a wave of resentment flared in his eyes. He clenched his fingers, and the paper was set ablaze, the ghost shrieking as it burned to ashes. Jiangxiang said darkly, "Break his legs. Haven't I told you that when you run into heretics, you should kill them outright and feed them to your dogs?" Wei Wuxian hastily backed away, leaving the donkey behind too. No matter how much Jiangxiang had hated him, he had always thought that the feeling would have disappeared somewhat over the last years. Who would have thought that it wouldn't be that easy? Not only was the hate still there, but it had thickened with time, like a jug of aged wine. And that rage was taken out on every cultivator who imitated him. There were people behind them standing guard, and at this time, Jinling attacked with greater ferocity. Wei Wuxian slipped 2 fingers into the spirit-trapping pouch, but just as he went to make a move, a strike of blue flashed. It was the glare of a sword crashing with Jin Ling's sword, and it shattered the golden shimmer of this high-quality blade in an instant. It wasn't that the other sword was superior, but rather that the difference between ability of the 2 wielders was too great. Wei Wuxian had had timing figured out at first, but the radiance of this incoming sword disrupted his steps, and he stumbled, falling flat on the ground before a pair of snow-white boots. He froze for a moment, then slowly looked up. The first thing that entered his vision was a long and slender blade, as crystalline as ice. This sword was famous in the cultivation world, and Wei Wuxian had had the honor of experiencing its power directly on multiple occasions, both fighting alongside it and against it. The hilt was forged from pure silver that was refined by secret methods, and the blade was extremely thin, clear, and transparent. It emanated the frigid ice of snow, and yet it could cut through iron as if it was mud. Thus, while the sword appeared light, agile, and transcendently airy, it was extremely heavy, and no ordinary person could possibly swing it. It was the sword Bichen. The blade reversed, and above Wei Wuxian's head there came the clang of the sword being sheathed. At the same time, Jiang Cheng's voice came over from the distance. "I was wondering who it was, so it was Lan Erganzi." The pair of white boots unhurriedly took 3 steps forward, walking around Wei Wuxian. Wei Wuxian looked up and got to his feet. When he brushed past the person, the 2 locked eyes for a brief second, seemingly accidentally. The newcomer was cloaked in soft, white moonlight. He carried a 7-string gochen on his back. The body of the instrument was narrower than the usual standard, an ebony black in color, but soft in the luster of its wood. A cloud-patterned ribbon was fastened around the man's forehead. The man was exceptional in both looks and elegance. His skin was fair, and his features were as refined as smooth jade. The color of his eyes was abnormally light, almost like a colored glaze, and it made his gaze appear overly cold. There was a frostiness to his expression, which was stern enough to appear stiff. Even when he saw Wei Wuxian's completely ridiculous-looking face, he appeared unperturbed. From head to toe, he was scrupulous and immaculate, without a single foot placed incorrectly. Even so, 2 words still jumped into Wei Wuxian's mind: funeral clothes. Those were funeral clothes, and that couldn't be denied, no matter how much the other clans proclaimed the uniforms of the Lan clan of Guzu to be the most pleasing to the eye and sang their exaggerated praises to the heavens. Furthermore, no matter how thoroughly Lan Wangji was praised as an unrivaled rare beauty, nothing could help the fact that he looked profoundly embittered, as if he had lost his wife. In an unlucky year, enemies are bound to clash. Blessings never come in pairs, and misfortunes never come singly. Lan Wangji stood unspeaking. He faced Jiang Cheng with calm quiet and met his eyes squarely. Jiang Cheng was exceptionally handsome, but he was still a little inferior to the one standing before him, and certainly the most impatient of the 2. He quirked a brow. "Hang Wenjun truly lives up to his reputation for appearing where there is chaos. What brings you here so deep into the mountains today?" Leaders of prominent cultivation clans did not normally care for those low-level evil spirits. However, Lan Wangji was an exception. He was never picky about his night hunt prey, nor would he refuse to appear if a nefarious creature wasn't tough enough or if it would not earn him any acclaim. He would attend as long as there was a plea for help, and it had always been that way, ever since he was young. Thus, appearing where there is chaos was how the people appraised Hang Wenjun's night hunt expeditions and praised his character. The way Jiang Cheng used the phrase was not complimentary, however, and the juniors attending behind Lan Wangji all felt a little uncomfortable with his tone. Lan Jinyi was the blunt and outspoken sort. "Isn't clan leader Jiang here too?" Qianshan replied coldly, "Tch, an elder is speaking. Who are you to interrupt?" The Lan clan of Guzu pride themselves on being a clan of etiquette. This is what disciples are being taught. Lan Wangji, who didn't seem to want to exchange any words with him, sent Lan Zizhui a look. The latter understood. Let the juniors speak to each other. And so Lan Zizhui stepped forward to turn to Jin Ling to reply. Jin Gunzi, the night hunts have always been a fair competition among the clans, but Jin Gunzi has set up so many nets all over Mount Dafan to make it impossible for cultivators of other houses to tread for fear of falling into traps. Does this not violate the rules of the night hunt? Jin Ling's cold expression was cast from the same mold as his uncle's. What can I do if they step into the traps due to their own stupidity? I must capture my prey. Everything else can wait. Lan Wangji wrinkled his brow. Jin Ling was about to say more when suddenly he realized that he couldn't open his mouth, nor produce any sound from his throat. He paled in panic. When Jiang Cheng saw that Jin Ling's lips had been glued together, unable to part, anger clouded his face, and all previous forced civility went out the window. You, Lan, what's the meaning of this? It's not up to you to discipline Jin Ling. Release the spell. This silence spell was what the Lan clan used to punish its disciples. Wei Wuxian had fallen victim to this little trick on many occasions. While it was not complex magic by any stretch of the imagination, only those of the Lan family could undo the spell. If one attempted to speak by brute force, then either their lips would be torn to shreds by the effort, or they'd lose their voice for days. The penitent one had to keep their mouth shut and self-reflect in silence until the punishment period was over. Lan Xinjui said, There is no reason to be angry, Sect Leader Jian. As long as he does not try to forcibly break the spell, it will automatically unbreak in one incense time. Jiang Cheng had yet to reply when a man clad in the Jiang clan's purple came rushing out of the forest. Sect leader! When he saw Lan Wangji standing there, however, he appeared hesitant. Jiang Cheng said derisively, Go ahead. What other bad news do you have to report? The sect disciple said in a small voice, Not long ago, a flying blue sword destroyed the immortal binding nets that you arranged. Jiang Cheng shot Lan Wangji a look, anger clouding his expression once more. How many? The sect disciple replied cautiously. All of them. Over 400. Jiang Cheng seethed with anger. He had never expected such bad luck in this expedition. He had originally come to assist Jin Ling. The boy was 15 this year, the age to make his debut and fight for experience with the other juniors from other clans. Jiang Cheng had reviewed the options carefully before deciding that Dunfun Mountain was a good hunting ground. He had then set up nets everywhere to scare off all the other cultivators, making it so difficult for them to move that they'd be forced to back off. Also, Jin Ling could emerge the winner without anyone fighting him for the title. While over 400 immortal binding nets were extremely expensive, the price was nothing to the Jiang clan of Yangmeng. However, destroyed nets were a small matter compared to losing face. Lan Wangji's actions made Jiang Cheng boil with anger, and his fury spiraled higher and higher. He narrowed his eyes, and his left hand subconsciously stroked the ring on his right index finger. This was a dangerous sign. Everyone knew that ring was a formidable, deadly spiritual weapon. Once the Jiang clan leader had started fiddling with it, it signaled his intent to kill. However, Jiang Cheng didn't stroke it for long before he forced his hostility back down. Although he was quite unhappy, as the leader of a sect, there was much to consider. He couldn't be impulsive as that brat Jin Ling. Ever since the decline of the Ni clan of Qingqi, of the current three great clans, the Jin clan of Lanling and the Lan clan of Guzu had always been close due to the strong personal friendship shared by their clan leaders. Jiang Cheng ruled over the Jiang clan of Yangmeng alone, so it could have been said that he was in a state of isolation. Huang Zhengjun, Lan Wangji, was a distinguished cultivator of great prestige. In addition, his elder brother Zhe Wujun, or Lan Zhijian, was the clan leader of the Lan clan of Guzu, and the two brothers had always gotten along well. Overall, it was best if Jiang Cheng kept things peaceful instead of giving in to his violent urges. Furthermore, Jiang Cheng's sword, Sandu, had never formally crossed with Lan Wangji's sword, Bichen, so no one knew which was the better blade. Although he had on his hand the family heirloom ring Zidian, Lan Wangji's Guchen, also named Wanji, was equally renowned. Jiang Cheng loathed being at a disadvantage in a fight, so unless victory was absolutely certain, attacking Lan Wangji was not within the realm of consideration. Jiang Cheng slowly withdrew his left hand, which had been stroking the ring. It appeared that Lan Wangji had set his mind to interfere with this affair, so continuing to play the role of the villain would only cause trouble. He would simply have to remember this for the time being. After weighing his options, Jiang Cheng turned his head and saw that Jinling still had his hand covering his mouth angrily. "Since Hung Wanjun wants to punish you, take the lesson this once. It's not easy for him either to manage the juniors of another clan." His tone was sarcastic, but it was unclear to whom it was directed. Lan Wangji, who had never responded to such provocation, ignored him. Jiang Cheng turned, his voice scathing. "What are you standing around for? Waiting for the prey to run into your sword itself? If you can't catch the creature here on Mount Dafan tonight, then you needn't come to see me in the future." Jinling shot Wei Wuxian a death glare, but didn't dare glare at Lan Wangji, who had been the one to punish him, into silence. He sheathed his sword and bowed to the two elders, then left with his bow in hand. Lan Xizhui spoke up. "Sect Leader Jiang, the Lan clan of Guzu will fully reimburse all the immortal binding nets that were destroyed." Jiang Cheng sneered. "No need." Then he turned in the opposite direction and strode confidently down the mountain. The sect disciples behind him all quietly followed with long faces, knowing there'd be an inevitable round of punishment when they returned. After they had gone, Lan Jingyi posed a general question. "Why is Sect Leader Jiang like that?" Then he remembered his Lan family upbringing and the rules against speaking behind anyone's back. He snuck a scared peek at Hung Wanjun before shrinking back and shutting up. Lan Sizhui gave Wei Wuxian a light smile and said, "We meet again, Mo Xiang. Wei Wuxian forced a smile, but it was Lan Wangji who spoke instead. His order was succinct and clear, without any flowery language. "Do your work." Only then did the juniors remember why they were on Mount Dafan. They gathered themselves and respectfully awaited further instructions. A moment later, Lan Wangji said, "Do your best. Do not overexert." His voice was deep and captivating. If one stood close, it would make the heart flutter. The juniors acknowledged the order politely and headed deeper into the woods, not daring to stay longer. Wei Wuxian thought to himself that Jiang Cheng and Lan Zan really were two completely different people. Even their methods of instructing juniors were irreconcilably opposed. Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly saw Lan Wangji give him a nod, curt and almost imperceptible. It made him unconsciously pause. Lan Wangji had been painfully serious ever since he was young. A principled perfectionist, always so stern and stiff, as if there had never been a time that he was lively. Back then, he had been extremely against Wei Wuxian's cultivating the demonic path. Lan Sizhui should have already informed Lan Wangji of his suspicious behavior at the Mo estate, yet the man only nodded at him and gave him regards. Wei Wuxian figured that he was thanking him for helping the Lan juniors out, so he immediately returned the gesture without thinking. But when he looked up again, Lan Wangji was already gone. He paused for a moment, then turned to descend the mountain. It didn't matter what prey was on Mount Dafan, he couldn't pursue it anymore. Wei Wuxian could rob anyone, but not Jinling. He couldn't believe that was Jinling. There were so many disciples in the Jin clan of Lanling that he genuinely never imagined that he might run into Jinling. Had he known, he never would have mocked Jinling with the comment of his, "Didn't your mother raise you with any manners?" If anyone else had said that to Jinling, Wei Wuxian would have taught that person what "a loose tongue spells trouble" means, but the tongue that had said it had been his own. After a moment of standing silent, Wei Wuxian raised his hand and slapped himself in the face. That slap was hard and clear, stinging his right cheek. Suddenly, there was a rustling in the bushes nearby, and when Wei Wuxian peered over, a spotted donkey emerged. He dropped his hand, and this time the donkey voluntarily approached to rub against it. Wei Wuxian tugged at its long ears and smiled wryly. "You wanted to save the damsel in distress, but made me go and act the hero instead." The spotted donkey was whining in response when a wave of cultivators came from a distant end of the hill. After the 400-plus immortal binding nets were slashed by Lan Wangji's flying sword, the hesitant cultivators that had been lurking in Fuzhou town now swarmed up the mountain anew. They were all technically Jin Ling's competition, and Wei Wuxian pondered for a moment on whether to beat them back down. After a moment of thought, he silently moved off the path. The group was composed of disciples from various clans, dressed in all sorts of various uniforms. They complained as they went. The Jin family and the Jiang family both, they all spoil him. So young and already so unreasonable and bossy. It'll be the end of the world if he takes over the Jin clan of Lanling in the future. We're all doomed. Wei Wuxian slowed his pace. A soft-hearted girl cultivator sighed. How can they not spoil and pamper him, losing both his parents at such a young age? Shimei, it doesn't work like that. So what if he lost both of his parents? There are plenty of people in the world who've lost their parents. If everyone acted like him, it'd be terrible. That being said, Wei Wuxian really went for it, didn't he? Jinling's mother was Jiang Cheng's blood sister, eh? And what's more, she was the Shiji who raised that Wei Wuxian. What an injustice for Jiang Yanli, too, to have raised such an ingrate. And Jin Sijuan was an even more tragic case. To meet such a horrible end just because of such a quarrel with Wei Wuxian in the past. Why did Wei Wuxian have quarrels with everyone? Ain't that just the question? Besides that pack of crazy dogs he kept, who have you ever heard getting along well with him? He had enemies everywhere. The world despised him. Even Hong Wenjun couldn't stand the sight of him. They were always at each other's throats, at complete odds with one another. Speaking of, thank goodness for Hong Wenjun today. After walking for a while, the sound of a trickling creek suddenly flowed into Wei Wuxian's ears. This was something that he hadn't heard on his way here. Only then did Wei Wuxian notice that he'd taken the wrong path down the mountain and forked off to another road. He led the donkey down to the side of the creek. The moon had risen, and the skies above the water were unconcealed by any branches or leaves. The creek was cracked with patches of frosty white. Reflected back at him, Wei Wuxian saw a face that distorted with the flow of the water. He slapped the water viciously, shattering that absurd, laughable face. He raised his dripping palms and washed away the powder foundation with the creek water. What the water now reflected was a young man. Incredibly handsome and poised, he was so pristine it was as if he had been washed by the moonlight above, with a beaming smile and bright eyes and lips that curved slightly upward. But when he hung his head and stared at himself, the droplets clinging to his lashes fell relentlessly like tears. This was a young, foreign face. This wasn't the Yiling patriarch, Wei Wuxian, who had once raised the earth and ravaged the world with bloody tempests. He stared at that reflection for a long time before he wiped his face a few more times, rubbing his eyes and sitting down heavily by the creek. It wasn't that he couldn't endure talk. After all, he was already well aware of the path he'd chosen back when he first made his decision. He had already cautioned himself to remember the motto of the Zhang clan of Yangmeng: attempt the impossible. He had truly thought his heart was made of stone. But humans were not stalks of grass, not unfeeling, and, in the end, he was human after all. The little spotted donkey seemed to know that he wasn't in a good mood right now, and amazingly, it did not bray impatiently, only swishing its tail while walking away after a moment of quiet. Wei Wuxian sat by the creek and didn't react. It looked back and kicked its hooves. Wei Wuxian still ignored it, so the spotted donkey returned in a huff and caught Wei Wuxian by the hem with its teeth, tugging and pulling. It made no difference to Wei Wuxian whether he stayed or left, so since the donkey had gone so far as to bite him, he went with it. The spotted donkey led him to some trees and started circling around the piece of grass. A Tian Kun bag sat quietly there. Over it hung a broken golden net, so it must have been something an unlucky cultivator dropped when they were trying to break free. Wei Wuxian picked up the bag and opened it. Inside was an assortment of items like a bottle gourd of medicine wine, talismans, a little Yao reflecting mirror, and so on. He rummaged through the bag for a bit and casually took out a handful of talismans. A ball of flame was suddenly ablaze in his hand. What had just ignited was the yin burning talisman. Like its name, it used yin energy as fuel and would automatically be ignited upon contact with yin energy. The greater the yin energy, the bigger the flame. It blazed in the instant it was taken out of the bag, meaning there were spirits nearby. The moment Wei Wuxian saw the firelight, he raised his guard and probed around for the direction with the torch raised. When he turned eastward, the fire died down. When he turned westward, the fire blazed. He had only taken a few steps in that direction when he saw a slumped form in white appear beneath a tree. The talisman burned out, and remnant embers fell from his fingertips. An elder, with his back facing him, was grumbling under his breath. Wei Wuxian slowly approached, and the words mumbled from the elder became clearer. "It hurts. It hurts." "Where does it hurt?" Wei Wuxian asked. "Head. The head. My head," the elder replied. "Let me take a look," Wei Wuxian said. He circled around the elder's side and saw a large, bloody, gaping hole on his forehead. This was the soul of the dead, probably killed by way of some instrument to the head. He was wearing funeral clothes, their material and cut both of high quality, meaning he had already been properly buried. This wasn't a soul of the living that a human had lost. But a soul of the dead should never have appeared on Mount Dafan. Wei Wuxian couldn't come up with a plausible explanation for this. Feeling uneasy, he hopped onto the back of the donkey, gave it a slap and a shout, and urged it to chase in the direction that Jin Ling and the others had approached the mountain. There were a number of cultivators pacing near the old graveyard, intending to wait for a windfall. Someone had brazenly raised a spirit attraction flag, only to summon a bunch of wailing souls. Wei Wuxian pulled on the reins, scanned the area, and asked loudly, "Excuse me, might I ask what the little Ganzi of Jin family and Lan family had gone?" As expected, there were actually responses now that he'd watched his face. A cultivator answered, "They left this place and went to the Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden." "The Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden?" Wei Wuxian asked. The family of independent cultivators from the countryside had also snuck back up the mountain after hearing the immortal binding nets had been destroyed and joined the night hunt. The middle-aged man saw that his clothes, along with that teeth-bearing donkey, looked like those of that lunatic who had rescued them earlier. Feeling somewhat awkward at that realization, he pretended nothing was the matter, but that round-faced girl pointed out the way. "That way! It's a stone cave shrine on the top of the mountain." Wei Wuxian questioned, "Which deity is worshipped at that shrine?" I think it's a natural-formed stone statue of a heavenly maiden." Wei Wuxian nodded. "Thank you." Then he urgently dashed in the direction of the shrine of the heavenly maiden. The deadbeat's marriage, the coffin struck by lightning, the fiancé killed by jackals, and the father and daughter who'd lost their souls consecutively, the extravagant funeral clothes. Bead by bead, everything was being threaded together to form a complete string. No wonder the compass of ill winds couldn't point in the right direction, and the spirit flag was even more useless. They had all underestimated the creature on Mount Dafan, because it wasn't what they thought it was at all. Meanwhile, Lan Sijue and company had already moved on to the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden in search of clues after coming up empty-handed when investigating the old graveyard. In Mount Dafan, besides the ancestral graves belonging to the townspeople of Fojiao Town, there was also the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden. It was neither Buddha nor Bodhisattvas that were worshipped in the shrine, but a dancing Heavenly Maiden. Centuries ago, a hunter from Fojiao Town traveled deep into the mountains and discovered a strange rock within a cave. It was nearly 3 meters tall, naturally formed, and looked extraordinarily like a human with all of its limbs posed as if dancing. What was more incredible was that the 5 features of this stone statue's face were vaguely recognizable, resembling the smiling face of a woman. The people of Fojiao Town were greatly amazed. They believed this was a divine rock, forged by the gathering of spiritual qi between heaven and earth, and they fabricated many of its related myths themselves. There was one about an immortal lord who was secretly in love with Jiaoshin Jianu, and carved a statue in her image to alleviate the misery of longing. When Jianu discovered it, she was enraged, and the incomplete statue was never heard of again. There was another where a jade emperor had a beloved daughter who passed early, and his longing for her manifested as this statue. There were all sorts of stories, and all were mind-boggling. Eventually, the townspeople began to truly believe these constructed myths that they told each other, and so the stone cave was renovated into a divine shrine, the stone platform carved into a divine altar, and the stone statue was thus worshipped as the dancing Heavenly Maiden, with year-round offerings. The interior of the cave was as spacious as a double-entranced temple, and that statue of the Heavenly Maiden stood in its center. At first glance, it certainly did very much resemble a human. Even the waistline could be said to be wonderfully graceful. However, one began to notice how rudimentary it was upon closer examination. Nonetheless, that a naturally formed object could resemble a human to this degree was already quite the marvel. Lan Jingyi raised the compass of ill winds high up, then down low, yet the needle was unmoved. Upon the altar was a mess of candle wax residue and a thick layer of incense ash, and the smell of rotten sweetness wafted from the offering plates. The people of the Lan clan of Guzu were all at least a little germophobic, so he fanned the air in front of his nose. I hear the locals say that prayers made at the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden are very effective, so why is it so run down? Why isn't anybody cleaning these plates? Lan Sijui replied, 7 people consecutively lost their souls, and rumors say it's some fierce fiend that had come out of the ancestral graves after the lightning struck, so everyone is scared of coming up the mountain. Since the worshippers stopped coming, there's naturally no one to clean up either. A disdainful voice sounded from outside the cave. Nothing but a crappy hunk of rock. Who knows who bestowed it with its divinity and had the audacity to place it here to worship? Jin Ling entered with his hands folded behind his back. The silence spell hadn't lasted long, and his mouth could open once more. However, he had nothing good to say the moment said mouth opened. He humphed, peering at the statue of the Heavenly Maiden. These rural villagers, instead of making a concerted effort on their own when there's trouble, all they do is pray to the divine. There are thousands of millions of people in the world, and the deities can barely take care of themselves, so why would they care about them? Besides, it's just some nameless rogue deity. If it's so effective, then I wish for the man-eating spirit of the Mount Dathan to appear right now in front of me and have that wish be granted. A group of cultivators from small clans followed behind him, and at his words they immediately agreed, laughing uproariously. The once silent shrine grew noisy and crowded all of a sudden with the inpouring of people. Lan Sijue shook his head quietly and turned around, his eyes unconsciously sweeping past the face of the Heavenly Maiden. The visible but indistinct features seemed to be a compassionate, smiling face, but he felt an indescribable sense of familiarity with this smiling face, as if he had seen it somewhere before. Where in the world had he seen it before? Lan Sijui felt that this was something important. He unconsciously approached the altar, wanting to examine the face of the heavenly maiden in greater detail. Right then, someone suddenly bumped into him. A cultivator who had been standing behind him suddenly collapsed noiselessly. The others were greatly alarmed, and everyone instantly raised their guard. Jinling demanded cautiously, "What's wrong with him?" Lan Sijue bent over with his sword in hand and checked. The cultivator was breathing just fine, as if he had merely fallen asleep all of a sudden, but he wouldn't wake no matter how much he was slapped or called to. Lan Sijui stood up. "This is like—" But before he could finish, the cave that had been dark was suddenly alight. Red light filled it, like a cataract of blood washing down the walls. The candles on the altar and in the corners of the stone cave all began to burn on their own. Clangs resounded in the cave as those who had swords unsheathed them, and those who had talismans pulled them out. Right then, somebody outside the shrine suddenly rushed inside and splashed the heavenly maiden statue with his gourd of medicinal wine. The stone cave was instantly flooded with a thick, choking smell of alcohol. The newcomer took out a talisman and slashed it through the air, hurling it towards the statue. The altar was immediately set ablaze, illuminating the cave with the brightness of day. Wei Wuxian tossed aside the Qiangkun bag that he had picked up, having used up everything that was inside it. He shouted, "Everyone get out! Watch out for the soul-eating heavenly maiden!" Someone cried out in alarm, "The heavenly maiden changed pose!" The divine statue had clearly had both arms raised earlier. One arm pointed to the sky, and one foot lifted, her form graceful. Yet in that moment, amidst the vibrant reds and yellows of the blazing fire, it had dropped both arms and legs. It was absolutely the truth and not a trick of the eye. In the next second, this divine statue raised one of its legs and stepped out of the flames. Wei Wuxian yelled, "Run! Run! Run! Stop hacking at it! It's useless!" Most of the cultivators paid him no mind. The soul-eating monster that they'd been searching for all over was finally appearing, so how could they let it go? However, even though there were so many spiritual swords attacking, so many talismans being thrown, and many other spiritual devices waving around, none of them stopped the statue from moving. It was nearly 3 meters high, and when it moved, it was like a towering giant, exceedingly imposing. It picked up 2 cultivators, raising it to its face. Its stone mouth seemed to open and close, and those 2 cultivators' swords dropped to the ground with clangs, their heads bowed. Obviously, they just had their souls sucked out. None of the attacks were effective. Finally, willing to listen to Wei Wuxian, the others swarmed out of the cave, fleeing for their lives in all directions. With so many people and so many faces, the higher Wei Wuxian's anxiety climbed, and the harder it was for him to find Jinling. He rode the donkey out, searching as he dashed into the bamboo grove. When he looked back, he encountered the Lan juniors, who were also in flight. Wei Wuxian called to them, "Children!" "Who are you calling children?" Lan Jingyi protested. "Do you know whose house we're from? Do you think you're our elder just because you washed your face?" Okay, Gaga, Wei Wuxian acquiesced. "Set off a signal. Call over that Hungwan Jun of your clan." The juniors nodded and searched their pockets as they ran. A moment later, Lan Sijui admitted aloud, "Those signal flares were all used up at Mobana." Wei Wuxian was shocked. "You guys didn't restock?" The signal flares were rarely ever used, maybe once every 800 years. Lan Sijui replied, feeling ashamed, "We forgot." "How could you forget?" Wei Wuxian tried to scare them. "If your Hungwan Jun finds out, you'll all be sorry." Lan Jingyi turned ashen-faced. "Oh no, we'll be punished to death by Hungwan Jun this time." "Good! Rightly deserved! You won't remember without punishment." Mogonzi, how did you know that the creature eating souls wasn't a fiend or a beast, but a heavenly maiden statue?" Lan Sijui asked. Wei Wuxian searched for signs of Jinling as he ran. "How did I know? I saw." Lan Jingyi caught up, and the two sandwiched him, one running on his left and one on his right. What did you see? We saw plenty too. You saw. And then, what's around the old graveyard? What else is there? Souls of the dead. Exactly, souls of the dead. So it couldn't be a soul-eating fiend or beast. It's obvious. If it were either of those things, then would it leave those souls of the dead floating around and not eat them up? No. This time, there was more than one asking questions. What's that? I gotta say, you lands of Guzu. Wei Wuxian couldn't resist anymore. Can you focus less on memorizing cultivators' etiquette, class origin history, and all that stinkin' long-winded nonsense, and teach more practical things instead? What's there not to understand? Souls of the dead are easier to absorb than souls of the living. The flesh of the living is like a protective shield. So, in order to devour souls of the living, this shield must be removed. Just like... He took a glance at the spotted donkey that was panting and rolling its eyes back as it ran. Just like this. If there's an apple in front of you and another apple in a locked box, which would you eat first? Of course, the one right in front of you. That creature only devours souls of the living, and it has a very particular way of doing so, which means it's super picky and quite powerful too. Lan Jingyi was shocked. That makes a lot of sense, I think. Wait, so you're not actually crazy? Lan Sijui explained as he ran. We all thought that the landslide and the lightning striking the coffins was how the lost souls came about, so naturally, we thought it would be a soul-eating fiend. Wrong, Wei Wuxian said. What's wrong? The order is different, and the cause is wrong. Let me ask you, between the landslide and the soul-eating business, which came first and which came after? Which is the cause and which is the consequence? Lan Sijui replied without hesitation. The landslide happened first, and the soul-eating came after. The former is the cause, and the latter the consequence. Completely wrong, Wei Wuxian explained. The soul-eating came first, and the landslide after. The soul-eating was the cause, and the landslide was the consequence. The night of the landslide, there was a sudden thunderstorm, and lightning struck open a coffin. Remember that? The first to lose his soul, that deadbeat, was trapped on the mountain for a night, then got married a few days later. What's wrong with that? Lan Jingyi asked. Everything, Wei Wuxian replied. An idle, penniless good-for-nothing? Where did he get the money to host a grand wedding? The boys couldn't answer. It was no wonder. The Lan clan of Guzu had never been a family that needed to consider the question of wealth or poverty. Wei Wuxian continued. Have you seen all the souls of the dead floating around Mount Dafan? There's an old man who was killed by a brutal strike to the head. The craftsmanship and material of his funeral garb are both excellent. To wear such extravagant funeral garb, there was no way his coffin was empty. There must have been some accompanying funerary items to keep his spirit at peace. The coffin that was struck open by lightning was probably his. The people who came to collect the corpse didn't discover any funerary items, so they must have been taken by that deadbeat, which would explain his sudden wealth. The deadbeat suddenly became rich and got married after the night of the landslide, so something strange must have happened that night. It was storming, and he was hiding from the rain in the mountains. Where on Mount Dafan is there shelter from the rain? The shrine of the Heavenly Maiden. And usually, when people visit a shrine, they always do one thing. Make a wish? Lan Sijui said. Correct. For example, he might ask to get lucky, hit it rich, have the money to get married or something. The Heavenly Maiden fulfilled his wish and set forth lightning that struck open the graves, showing him the wealth within the coffins. His wish was granted, and at this price, the Heavenly Maiden descended on his wedding night and sucked out his soul. You're guessing, right? Said Lan Jingyi. Yes, but if we pursue the train of thought, then everything is explained, Wei Wuxian replied. How do you explain Miss Ayun? Lan Sijui asked. Good question, Wei Wuxian said. You must have asked around too before you ascended the mountain. Ayun had only just gotten engaged at that time. Every young girl who's just gotten betrothed must have the same wish. Lan Jingyi didn't quite get it. What wish? Nothing more than, I hope my husband will love and cherish me for the rest of his life, and he'll only love me, or some such, Wei Wuxian said. The two youths were confused. Can a wish like that be granted? Wei Wuxian shrugged. It's easy. As long as your husband's life ends very soon after, then wouldn't he have loved you for his entire life? Understanding dawned on Lan Jingyi, and he exclaimed in excitement. So after Miss Ayan became engaged, her husband was killed by a jackal in the mountains the very next day. And it's very possible because Miss Ayan went and made a wish at the shrine for the Heavenly Maiden. Wei Wuxian struck while the iron was hot. Whether it was the jackal or something else that killed him was hard to say. Ayan had another point of interest. Of all the victims, why was she the only one whose soul has returned? How is she different from the others? The difference is that she had a family member who also lost his soul. In other words, there was a family member who replaced her. Blacksmith Zheng, Ayan's father, loved his daughter. So when he saw that his daughter had lost her soul and no medicine could work, under such dire circumstances, what was the only thing he could do? Lan Sijui answered quickly this time. He could only place his only hope in the heavens, so he also went to the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden and made a wish. The wish was, I hope my daughter Ayan's soul will return. Wei Wuxian commended him. That's why Ayan's soul returned, and the reason why the third person to lose his soul was Blacksmith Zheng. And although Ayan's soul was spit back out, it couldn't escape being damaged. Once the soul returned to its rightful place, Ayan unconsciously began to imitate the dancing pose of the Heavenly Maiden, including the smile. The commonality between those who had lost their souls was clear. They had most likely all made a wish before the Heavenly Maiden statue, and the price for their wishes to come true was their souls. This Heavenly Maiden statue had once been an ordinary rock, but it just so happened to resemble a person, so it had received centuries of worship that led it to gain spiritual power. However, its greed was insatiable. One single, deviant whim gave it a mind to expedite the elevation of its spiritual powers by way of consuming souls, offering the fulfillment of a wish in exchange for the devouring of a soul. It operated on the same terms of those wish-makers who offered their own souls up to be devoured. It was a fair trade by all appearances. Everyone got what they wanted, which was why the needle of the compass of ill winds did not move and spirit-attracting flags summoned nothing. The treasured swords and talismans were all ineffective because the creature on Mount Dafan wasn't some nefarious being, but instead a god. This was a rogue god, raised by centuries of worship, so to use devices made for attacking malicious spirits against it was the equivalent of attempting to extinguish fire with fire. Lan Jingyi exclaimed loudly, Wait! Just now, inside the shrine, somebody else got their soul sucked out too, and we didn't hear his wish. Wei Wuxian's heart lurched, and he halted in his step. Someone had their soul sucked out inside the shrine? Tell me every detail of what happened there without leaving out a single thing. Lan Sijui quickly gave the clear account. When Wei Wuxian heard that Jin Ling had said, If it's so effective, then I wish for the man-eating spirit of Mount Dafan to appear before me now and have that wish granted, he exclaimed aloud, Is that not a wish? That is making a wish. The others who had agreed with Jin Ling were tacitly understood to have made the same wish. Since the soul-eating Heavenly Maiden was right before them, at the time, the wish had already come true, so what followed had been the collection of payment owed. All of a sudden, the spotted donkey came to a stop and started running in the opposite direction. Caught off guard, Wei Wuxian was once again thrown off its back, but he stubbornly grabbed onto the reins. However, from ahead of them in the shrubbery came the crunching and slurping sound of something being eaten. An incomparably gigantic figure was hidden in the bushes, its massive head moving back and forth over the abdomen of a person on the ground. When it heard the approaching noise, its head shot up, meeting their eyes. The soul-eating heavenly maiden's facial features had originally been unclear, the shape of the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth rough. But after she had devoured so many cultivators in one go, her 5 features were now distinct. It was now the face of a smiling woman. Copious blood dripped from her bottom lip as she gnawed vigorously upon the arm dangling from her mouth. Everyone immediately followed the spotted donkey and bolted in the opposite direction. Lan Sidri cried despairingly, "That's not right! The Yiling Patriarch said that high-level ones only ate souls, and only low-level ones ate flesh." Wei Wuxian replied helplessly, "What are you blindly believing him for? Everything he came up with was utter bullshit. None of the rules are absolute. Just take her for a baby. When she didn't have teeth, she could only eat gruel and soup, but now that she's grown up, she wants to eat meat. Her spiritual powers have just shot up. Of course she wants to try something new." The soul-eating heavenly maiden stood up. She was big and tall, and moved all 4 of her limbs as she danced crazily, seeming jubilant. Suddenly, a piercing arrow came flying through the air and caught her right in the forehead, the arrow penetrating through to the back of her head. Having heard the strum of the bowstring, Wei Wuxian gazed at where the sound had come from. Jin Ling stood upon the tall hill nearby, already knocking a second arrow into his bow and drawing the string. He let go, and another arrow pierced through her head, its impact so powerful that it forced the soul-eating heavenly maiden to stumble back. Lan Sidri yelled, "Jin Gonzi, set off your signal flare!" Jin Ling ignored him, determined to bring down this monster. Sullenly, he knocked 3 arrows onto the bow this time. The soul-eating heavenly maiden wasn't upset in the least, despite having been shot in the head twice. A smile still graced her face as she charged towards Jin Ling. Although she danced as she went, her speed was still terrifyingly fast, and half the distance was covered in an instant. Several cultivators popped out from the sides to fight her, impeding her from moving further. Every single arrow Jin Ling shot hit the mark, and he fired non-stop. It seemed as though he'd made up his mind to empty his quiver before going near the soul-eating heavenly maiden for close-range combat. His hands were steady and his aim was precise, but unfortunately, no spiritual devices would work on her. Jiancheng and Lan Wangji were both waiting for news in Fojiao town. Who knew if they would notice anything amiss and rush over? You needed water to extinguish fire. If spiritual devices wouldn't work, then how about demonic tricks? Wei Wuxian pulled out the sword hanging on Lan Sijue's waist, cut down a piece of thin bamboo, and swiftly made a flute. He placed it on his lips and sucked in a deep breath. A sharp flute note pierced through the night sky like a whistling arrow, shooting straight from the clouds. He shouldn't have done this unless it was absolutely necessary, but with things going as they were, he no longer cared what was summoned, as long as it was murderous enough and vengeful enough. As long as it could rip apart the soul-eating heavenly maiden, that was good enough. Lan Sijue was completely dumbfounded. Lan Jingyi, however, covered his ears and cried out in dismay, "What are you doing playing flute at a time like this? It sounds horrible." Of the group of cultivators engaged in fighting the soul-eating heavenly maiden, several had already had their souls sucked away. Jin Ling drew his sword. He was less than 6 meters away from the soul-eating heavenly maiden, and his heart was pounding, hot blood surging in his brain. "If I don't take her head in one swing, then I'll die here. And if I die, I die." Just then, clinking and clanking sounds resounded within the forest of Mount Dafan. Clink, clank, clink, clank. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, the noise came haltingly and reverberated in the deadly silent forest. It sounded like iron chains hitting each other, dragging on the ground. It was coming closer and closer, louder and louder. For some reason, this sound was oppressively threatening. Even the soul-eating heavenly maiden stopped her dance, her arms raised in the air as she stared blankly at the deep darkness from whence the sound came. Wei Wuxian put away the flute and stared intently in the same direction. Although the ominous feeling was growing stronger and stronger, since this creature was willing to answer his summons, then at least it was one that would obey him. The noise came to a sudden stop, and a silhouette materialized from the darkness. After seeing the figure and its face clearly, many of the cultivators' faces contorted. Even when facing the soul-eating heavenly maiden, who could suck away their souls at any time, they never shrank back, nor did they show any sign of fear. However, the sound of their screams had now filled with unconcealable terror. "The Ghost General! It's the Ghost General! It's Wen Ning!" Like the Yiling Patriarch, the one known by the moniker Ghost General was infamous and widely known by all, and the two usually appeared together. There was only one man whom the name referred to, the number one fierce corpse under the control of the Yiling Patriarch, Wei Ying. The one who aided his tyrannical rule, fanned the flames of chaos, helped the villain in his evil, and caused havoc in the world. Wen Ning. Wen Ning's head was slightly bowed, and his hands drooped by his side like a marionette waiting for the orders from his puppeteer. His face was pale and delicate, and as a matter of fact, he had a certain easy and somewhat melancholic handsomeness. However, there were no pupils in his eyes, only a field of deadly white. With this, plus the numerous black cracks crawling up his neck and cheeks, that melancholia was transformed into a terrifying gloom. The hems of his long robes and sleeves were tattered and frayed, revealing wrists the same ghastly white as his face. A pair of iron shackles and chains were locked over him, same with the ankles. The clinking and clanking sound were created while he dragged himself along, and when he stopped, everything returned to a deadly silence once more. It wasn't hard to imagine why the cultivators present were all terrified. Wei Wuxian wasn't any calmer than the others, and the tempestuous waves inside his heart had already surged past his head. It wasn't that Wen Ning shouldn't have shown up here, but rather that he shouldn't have appeared in the world at all. He should have been killed and reduced to ashes long before the siege at the burial mounds. When Jin Ling heard the others say Wen Ning's name, the sword he was pointing at the soul-eating heavenly maiden unconsciously changed directions. Taking advantage of him being distracted, the soul-eating heavenly maiden reached out her long arm in delight and picked him up. Seeing how she had already opened her mouth wide and was nearing Jinling's face, Wei Wuxian no longer had time for his own shock. He raised the bamboo flute once more. His hands were trembling slightly, and the melody he played quivered with him. On top of that, because of how crudely made the flute was, the sound could almost be said to be raspy and awful. 2 notes were played, and Wen Ning began to move. In the blink of an eye, he shifted and appeared before the soul-eating heavenly maiden. Wen Ning struck out with his palm, and the soul-eating heavenly maiden's neck made a cracking sound. Her body didn't move, but the slap turned her head all the way around. Her face was now facing the same direction as her back, but still that smile remained. Wen Ning struck again, bare-handed, and cleanly chopped off the soul-eating maiden's right hand, which held Jinling in its clutches. She looked down at the wrist that had been cut so cleanly. She didn't twist her own head back to the correct position, but instead turned so her face and her back were facing Wen Ning. Wei Wuxian didn't dare slack off. He took a deep breath and bowed his head, directing Wei Ning to face battle. However, it wasn't long before he began to feel more and more apprehensive. Low-level walking corpses could not think for themselves and required his orders as guidance. Even fierce corpses, strong in attack, were often confused with no consciousness of their own. Wen Ning was different. He had been refined by Wei Wuxian, and it wouldn't have been a lie to say that he was the strongest fierce corpse in the world, one of a kind. He could think. He could ponder. Other than his lack of care for injuries, of fire, of cold, poison, and anything the living might fear, he was no different from the living. But the Wen Ning in this moment clearly had no consciousness of his own. Just as he was feeling bewildered by this, alarmed cries suddenly sounded from the field. It turned out Wen Ning had beaten down the soul-eating heavenly maiden, firmly pinning her on the ground before picking up a boulder taller than a man, raising it over the soul-eating heavenly maiden and heavily bludgeoning her with it. The powerful blow struck the soul-eating heavenly maiden's body like lightning, forcibly crushing her into pieces. Amidst the white debris of rocks strewn about, a glowing, snow-white pearl rolled forth. This was the core, formed by the dozens of souls that the soul-eating heavenly maiden had devoured, and if collected and carefully managed, the people whose souls had been devoured earlier could still be restored. However, no one had the mind to pick up that pearl at the moment. All the swords that had been previously pointed at the soul-eating heavenly maiden earlier were now turned Wen Ning's way. One of the cultivators shouted at the top of his lungs, "Surround him!" Some answered hesitantly, but there were more and more who were wavering, and some slowly backed away. That cultivator shouted again, "Fellow cultivators, stop him and don't let him escape. It's Wen Ning we're talking about here." His words roused the crowd, as if a mere soul-eating monster could be compared to the ghost general. Although it was unknown why he would come, killing 1,000 soul-eating fiends could not compare to capturing one single Wen Ning. After all, with a bite harder and more fearsome than its bark, this was the most obedient mad dog of the Yiling patriarchs. Catching him would make one's name soar across the cultivating world. The only reason they had rushed to attend the night hunt at Mount Dafan in the first place was to fight over nefarious creatures and gain experience, so it couldn't be helped that there were now those who stirred at this thought. However, the older cultivators, who had personally witnessed the madness of Wen Ning in the past, still didn't dare to move recklessly, and so that man shouted again, "What are you all afraid of? It's not like the Yiling Patriarch is here." That was true, and when they thought about it, yeah, what did they have to be afraid of? Wen Ning's master had already been shredded to pieces. With those words, the swords circling around Wen Ning suddenly closed in. With a swing of his arm, the heavy black chains swept in a circle, knocking all the flying swords away. Then he took a step forward, seizing the neck of the person closest to him, and lifting him easily off the ground. Wei Wuxian knew the melody that he had been playing earlier was too urgent, too aggressive, and that it had exacerbated Wen Ning's furiosity. He had to be neutralized, his emotions calmed, and so Wei Wuxian confidently played another tune. This melody was one that came to his mind naturally, gentle and tranquil, a significant contrast to the strange, sharp sound from before. Wen Ning froze at the sound, then slowly turned towards where the flute was calling him. Wei Wuxian remained still, meeting those pupilless eyes. A moment later, Wen Ning let go, and the cultivator fell to the ground. He dropped both his arms and walked step by step towards Wei Wuxian. His head had hung low as he dragged his chains across the ground, appearing somewhat dejected. Wei Wuxian backed away as he played the flute, luring him over, and as they walked for a while like this, retreating into the forest, suddenly he smelled the refreshing scent of sandalwood. He backed into someone and felt a sharp pain around his wrist, the sound of the flute abruptly stopping with it. "Oh no," Wei Wuxian thought. When he turned around and looked, he was met squarely with Lan Wangji's eyes. Their color was so light, the man's gaze appeared frozen. Not good. Lan Wangji had personally witnessed him play the flute to control corpses in the past. Lan Wangji had him firmly gripped by one hand, and Wen Ning stood woodenly, not 6 meters away from them. He looked around sluggishly, as if searching for the sound of the flute that had vanished so suddenly. In the forest nearby, firelight and voices began to grow. Wei Wuxian's mind spun rapidly, and he came to a decision right away. So what if he's seen it before? There are millions out there who know how to play the flute, and the number of people who try to learn the Yiling Patriarch's ways of controlling corpses with the flute could form an entire sect of their own. I'll deny everything, even if it kills me. He resolutely ignored the hand gripping him, raising his arms and continuing playing the flute. This time, he played even more urgently, as if urging, as if reprimanding, his breath unsteady, the notes cracking, shrieking, and sharp. He suddenly felt Lan Wangji's grip harden. His wrist was going to snap from the force. Unable to withstand the pain, Wei Wuxian's fingers slackened, and the bamboo flute fell to the ground. Thankfully, his orders were clear enough, and Wen Ning retreated rapidly, delving soundlessly into the hauntingly dark forest in an instant and vanishing without a trace. Wei Wuxian was afraid that Lan Wangji could give chase and kill Wen Ning, so he reversed the hold and seized him back. Yet, unexpectedly, Lan Wangji's eyes were locked firmly on him, and he'd never spared a single look Wen Ning's way. The two stood there thus, clutching each other, face to face as they stared at one another. It was then that Jiangcheng appeared. He had forced himself to wait patiently for the conclusion of the hunt at Fojiu town, yet he hadn't even finished a cup of tea before a sect disciple came rushing down the mountain in a panic, telling of the terrible and brutal creature on Mount Dafan. Greatly shaken, he charged back up the mountain, shouting, "Ah Ling!" Jin Ling had almost had his soul sucked away earlier, but he was safe and well now, and all in one piece. "Juju!" Seeing that nothing had happened to Jin Ling, Jiangcheng was greatly relieved. However, that relief soon turned into fury. "Do you not have a signal flare on you? Don't you know to set one off when you run into these creatures? What are you pretending to be so strong for? Get the hell over here!" Jinling was angry at not having captured the soul-eating heavenly maiden as well, and he yelled back, "Aren't you the one who said that if I couldn't capture it by any cost, that I shouldn't go back to you?" Jiangcheng really wanted to slap this stinking brat back up its mother's womb. He had indeed said those things, and he couldn't possibly eat his own words. He could only turn to the cultivators who had collapsed all over the ground and demand of them mockingly, "So what was it exactly that has pulverized you all into such an honorable state?" Among the cultivators dressed in a myriad of colors were a number of disciples of the Zheng clan of Yangmeng in disguise, secretly assisting Jinling under Jiangcheng's orders in the event that he couldn't win this challenge. Truly, as an elder, he had gone through great pains regarding this outing. One of the cultivators was still in a state of shock. Sect leader, it was Wen Ning." Jiangcheng thought he must have heard wrong. "What did you say?" "Wen Ning's back," that man said. In that split second, a mixture of shock, hatred, fury, and disbelief all assailed Jiangcheng's face. It took a while before he replied coldly, "That creature was already reduced to ashes as a warning to all. How could he come back?" "It really was Wen Ning," the sect disciple exclaimed. "There was definitely no mistake. I definitely wasn't mistaken." He suddenly pointed over. He was the one who summoned him." Wei Wuxian was still at a standstill with Lan Wangji, but in an instant, he became the focus of attention of everybody present. Jiancheng's lightning-cold eyes also slowly gazed in his direction. A moment later, Jiancheng's lip pulled into a twisted smile. His left hand subconsciously began stroking the ring once more. He said softly, "Excellent. Back, are you?" He let go of his left hand, and a long whip dangled from it. The whip was extremely thin. Just as the name Zidian implied, it was a long purple current of lightning, crackling like the dark thunder that crawled through stormy skies. He firmly gripped one end in his hand. When he brandished it, it was as if he struck out with an incomparably swift thunderbolt. Wei Wuxian hadn't yet made a move, but Lan Wangji had already taken out his gouqian. Steadfast as he plucked the string, like a rock in a river rousing ripples, the sound undulated through the air. It clashed against the purple lightning, canceling the attack. All previous considerations Jiangcheng had about not recklessly engaging in a fight and not making enemies of the Lan went out the window. That night, in the skies above Mount Dafan's forest, there were at times bursts of purple lightning. At other times, it was as bright as day. There were at times the crashes of thunder, and at times the long wails of the gouqian. The rest of the cultivators quickly retreated to a safe distance to watch from afar, scared witless but unable to move their eyes away. After all, it was rare to have such a chance to see two distinguished cultivation leaders from prominent clans clash in combat, and they couldn't help but hope the fight turned out more aggressive, more intense. There was a certain current of unspeakable anticipation as they hoped the Lan and Jiang clans really would fall out. Things would be more interesting then. And, over on the other side, Wei Wuxian found his chance and bolted. Everyone was astonished. Hadn't the whip been missing him because Lan Wangji had been blocking it for him? Was he not seeking his own death by running off now? Sure enough, it was as if Jiancheng had grown eyes on his back the moment he saw Wei Wuxian break out of Lan Wangji's area of protection. There was no way he'd miss such a good opportunity. He raised the whip and struck, and the purple lightning swam forth like a vicious dragon, striking him right in the heart of his back. Wei Wuxian was almost sent flying by the whip's impact, but fortunately, the spotted donkey blocked him before he crashed directly into a tree. However, when the strike hit, both Lan Wangji and Jiangcheng stopped in their tracks, dumbfounded. Wei Wuxian rubbed at the small of his back and crawled to his feet with the support of the donkey, then hid behind it while yelling, "Wow! Must be nice coming from such a powerful clan, eh? Beating whoever you want." Lan Wangji was speechless. Jiancheng was also speechless. Shocked and outraged, Jiancheng eventually said, "What's going on?" Zidian held a strange power. If used against an individual who was possessed, the body and the interloping soul would be separated, and said soul would be cast out of the flesh by the purple lightning without exception. However, this man still behaved and moved as normal after being whipped, lively and well. There was no other explanation aside from the conclusion that he was not possessed. Wei Wuxian, however, thought, "Duh, of course Zidian can't whip my soul out. I'm not possessed. I was offered a body, forcibly offered a body." Jiangcheng appeared shocked and confused, and was about to whip him again when Lan Jingyi protested, "Sect Leader Zhang, isn't that enough? That's Gideon you're using." There was no such thing as an initial blunder that required a second attempt for a spiritual device on the level of Zidian. If a soul wasn't whipped out, then it wasn't whipped out. If the man wasn't possessed, then he wasn't possessed. Otherwise, it wouldn't live up to its name. That shout forced Jiangcheng, who cherished his reputation, to cease his assault. But if that wasn't Wei Wuxian, who else could summon Wen Ning? Jiangcheng couldn't accept it, no matter how he thought about it, and he pointed at Wei Wuxian with a dark face. "Who exactly are you?" Just then, a nosy onlooker finally interrupted. He cleared his throat. Sect Leader Jiang, you might not be aware of this because you don't pay attention to such matters, but this is Mo Xiang Yu, is a Jing clan of Lunling's He's a former sect disciple of the Jing clan. But because his spiritual power was weak and he wasn't serious about training, in addition to that harassment of his peers, he was kicked out of the Jing clan of Lanling. There was also talk of him going crazy. In my opinion, he was probably indignant at having failed in cultivating the orthodox way, and so he deviated. He might not be possessed by the Yiling Patriarch. That harassment? What harassment? Jiangcheng demanded. That kind of harassment. You know. Someone couldn't hold back and said, "A cut sleeve." Jiangcheng's brow twitched. The look he gave Wei Wuxian was even more disgusted now. There was more to it, but no one dared to say so in front of Jiangcheng's face. Though his reputation wasn't great, it had to be admitted that before the Yiling Patriarch, Wei Wuxian had defected from the Jiang clan of Yangmeng. He had been well known to be a handsome man and sophisticated gentleman, well versed in the 6 arts. He had been ranked 4th in looks and character amongst the young masters of the prominent clans. Charming and cheerfully handsome, the people had called him, and this hot-tempered sect leader Jiang had happened to be ranked 5th, defeated by 1 rank, so no one dared raise the subject with him. Wei Ying was frivolous and flirty, and he loved ambiguously gallivanting about with beautiful women. Who knew how many lady cultivators had fallen victim to his rotten charms? And yet, there had never been any word of him liking men. Even if he were to possess another in order to avenge himself, based on Wei Ying's taste, he would never pick a gay, donkey-riding lunatic with his face painted like a hanged ghost. Someone else grumbled, "They're not alike, no matter how you look at them. And that flute was played so awfully. He can't even learn that right. It's nothing but a crude imitation." Upon the battlefield back during the Sunshot campaign, the sound of the Yiling Patriarch's flute had pierced through the lasting night, and his ghost soldiers and ghost generals had been like an invincible army of millions, cutting down all who stood in their way. That flute was said to be like divine music, and so how could it be compared to the sad moan horribly played by the abandoned son of the Jin clan? Even if Wei Wuxian was an awful character, that wasn't how comparisons should be drawn. It was simply too insulting. Wei Wuxian felt a little woeful. "Why don't you try not practicing for a dozen years, then make a crappy flute out of some chopsticks and play me a tune? I'll kneel if you can play it well." Zhang Cheng had determined that this man was Wei Wuxian earlier, and the cold blood in his veins boiled. But now, the Zidian in his hand had clearly told him that he was not. Zidian would never lie, and nor would it make a mistake. He quickly calmed down to contemplate. This wasn't a big deal. He would find an excuse to take him back with him, then use any means possible to beat a confession out of him. Something would be spilled. There was no fear regarding that. He refused to believe the man would give nothing away. In any event, it wasn't like he hadn't done similar things before. Having come to this conclusion, he gave a hand signal. The disciples understood and approached in a circle. Wei Wuxian quickly led his donkey and hopped behind Lan Wangji's back, clutching his heart and gasping, "Ah! What are they going to do to me?" Lan Wangji cast him a glance, tolerant of his incredibly rude, noisy, and extravagant antics. Zhang Cheng saw that he had no intent of moving aside and said, "Lan Erganzi, are you trying to make things difficult for me on purpose?" Everyone in the cultivation world knew that this young clan leader of the Jin family had developed a near-crazy obsession with taking precautions against Wei Wuxian, and that he would rather catch the wrong person than let anyone go. Anyone that was even remotely suspected of being possessed by Wei Wuxian would be taken back to the Jiang clan of Yanmeng and undergo brutal torture. If he elected to apprehend someone and bring them back, they would be certain to lose half their life. Lan Sijue spoke up. "Sect Leader Zheng, the truth is before us. Mo Ganzi is not possessed, so why must you trouble an insignificant individual?" Zhang Cheng said coldly, "Then I wonder why Lan Erganzi has been so determined to shield this insignificant individual since earlier." Wei Wuxian suddenly snorted and chuckled. "Hey, Sect Leader Jiang," he said. It's troublesome if you keep clinging to me like this." Jiang Cheng's brow twitched, instinctively sensing this person wasn't about to say anything pleasant. Wei Wuxian continued, "Your kindness is too much, thank you. But you're also overthinking things. Even if I like men, I don't like all men, and I definitely don't just go home with any man who waves at me. And I'm not interested in your type." Wei Wuxian was trying to disgust him on purpose. Jiang Cheng hated losing, no matter how nonsensical the competition. If someone were to say that he wasn't as good as so-and-so, then he would be so angry that he'd stop eating and drinking until he'd thought of a way to win against them. Sure enough, Jiang Cheng's face darkened. "Oh, then please enlighten me. What is your type?" "What's my type?" Wei Wuxian replied. I like Han Wenjun's type." Lan Wangji, on the other hand, could never tolerate such frivolous and senseless jokes. Once he grew disgusted, he would definitely draw the line and keep his distance on his own. Disgusting both of them would be killing two birds with just one stone. Yet, unexpectedly, when Lan Wangji heard him, he turned around. "As you say," he said expressionlessly. Wei Wuxian said. Lan Wangji looked back. Without breaching etiquette, but allowing no room for discussion, he stated, "I am taking this person back to Lan Clan." Wei Wuxian was briefly speechless. "Huh?"